At a time when every organization wants an edge in performance, Dr. Rodger Duncan is one expert who makes a real difference. He began his career as an award-winning journalist, covering business and politics. He was a university professor. He worked on Wall Street. He was an executive with 2 Fortune 100 companies. And his consulting clients have included some of the best organizations in the world, as well as cabinet officials in 2 White House administrations. Rodger Duncan has been there. He knows what it takes to create competitive advantage. And he can help you and your organization translate good plans into great performance.
She'd take a pair of glasses off the rack and put them on, and they had a little sign there with different sizes of type, and she'd kind of go back and forth like this. And I was fascinated by that, and I stood off to the side and watched very discreetly, and she tried on several pairs of glasses that way and finally found a pair that she apparently liked. She had a very self-satisfied look on her face, and she headed for the cash register, and I was right behind her, and I said, "Ma'am, I've never seen anyone try on eyeglasses in a grocery store. I bet it's really hard to find a pair that's just right." And she looked up at me and said, "Yep, sure is, mister, especially since I'm buying them for my neighbor." Now, I cannot recommend that lady's approach to optometry, but I very much admire her attentiveness to the needs of her neighbor. Rapid change represents the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity facing leaders today. Effective leadership is all about effective change management, and in this fast-paced world of ours, a critical ingredient of great leadership is the desire and the ability to see the world through the lenses of the people we want to influence. In fact, that little lady in the grocery store epitomized the first principle of leadership I want to leave with you today. That principle is see it their way. To be effective in leading people in a world of constant change, we must thoroughly understand their frame of reference, their point of view, the lens through which they interpret the world. Why is change so tough to deal with? Consider this quote from the CEO of a large organization. He said, "It's like our company is undergoing 4 medical procedures at the same time. One person is in charge of a root canal. Someone else is setting a broken foot. Another person is working on a displaced shoulder, and someone else is getting rid of a gallstone. Each operation is a success, but the patient dies of shock." Simply put, there's a lot of simultaneous activity going on in most organizations, a lot of competition for time, budget, agenda, and all of the other resources that we have. Even when we find smart people doing smart things, we often find a lack of integration. Some of the pieces fit together all right, many of them often don't. And the result is what I call fragmented focus. And it's very frustrating to good people, sort of the way you'd feel if you spent your day trying to push water uphill with a rake. Lots of activity, but only marginal results. So in this environment, in this context, what do I mean by the principle, see it their way? I don't mean that you must necessarily agree with everybody you lead. In fact, creative, civil disagreement is one of the characteristics of a dynamic team. I'm talking about understanding. Sympathy is about agreement, empathy is about understanding, and great leaders have empathy. They work very hard to understand the frames of reference of the people that they want to influence and lead. Many folks apparently try to lead primarily at the attitude level, as though leadership are little more than some sort of cheerleading exercise. The thinking seems to be that if you say the right words and exude the right levels of enthusiasm and kinetic energy and noise, people will follow you anywhere. But of course, that's simply not so. Let me illustrate the importance of empathy with a true story from my friend Stephen Covey, author of the best-selling 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen was on a subway in New York City one morning, and a man got on with several small children, stair-step in age. The youngest was about 2 years, just a toddler. The man sat down, stared at the floor, the train lurched forward, and the children just went nuts. They ran up and down the aisles, knocking over packages, stepping on people's feet. Stephen was concerned about the safety of the children. The little guy had fallen over a couple of times. He also found himself a little bit irritated that the man wouldn't control his children. So he got up, walked across the aisle, sat down by the man and said, "Sir, are these your children?" The man said, "Yes, they are." He said, "Well, can you see they're kind of out of hand? This little guy's fallen down a couple of times. He could get hurt. Maybe you could have the children sit down and they would be safer and the passengers would be more comfortable." The man said, I can see the children are kind of out of hand. We just left the hospital, and their mother has been there for a while, and she died an hour ago, and I've told the children that their mother has passed away, and I'm sure it just hasn't soaked in. They're probably in some sort of shock. I know I am. I love my wife dearly, and I don't know how I'm going to live without her. Well, with new and more complete information, Stephen's frame of reference changed instantly. Rather than seeing that man as rude and uncaring, he now saw him for what he was, a fellow human being in grief and shock. And when his frame of reference changed, his attitude and behavior changed. Rather than wanting to scold the man, he wanted now to reach out with empathy. The urge to give unsolicited advice was instantly replaced with the urge to comfort and help. You see, behavior is driven by attitude, and attitude is driven by the underlying frames of reference. When we invite people to get on board, we must be able to demonstrate to them that the train is headed someplace that's in their best interest too. Before we can ever make a strong business case for action, we must make a strong psychological case for action. If we want to help people with modest performance improvements, we can operate at the attitude and behavior levels. If we want to help them make quantum leaps in performance, we must understand their frames of reference. Then we can either accommodate those views or we can work to change those views, but first we need to see it their way.
Dr. Duncan makes a point of emphasizing personal accountability for results. In helping people boost performance, he underscores the importance of addressing root causes instead of just treating symptoms.
Second leadership principle I'd like to leave with you. Be a gardener, not a mechanic. A first tendency of many business people is to fix things. After all, we're paid to solve problems. So the metaphor of the mechanic seems very natural. Unfortunately, some leaders then try to fix people. I could ask how many here today would like to be fixed. Not many of us want to be fixed. We might be open to persuasion or influence, but we don't want to be fixed. Rather than adopt the role of mechanic, great leaders adopt the role of gardener. So what does a gardener do? A gardener creates an environment that invites growth, that's conducive to growth, an environment full of light and nourishment, an environment full of sufficient space for stretching and growing and expanding. Great leaders and great gardeners resist the temptation to micromanage. They know that flowers cannot grow if you keep jerking them out of the ground to check the roots.
Dr. Duncan draws on his vast reservoir of experiences to drive home critical points about high performance.
Great leaders invest a lot of energy in creating devotion to a worthy cause. They're much more interested in getting a great thing done than in who gets the credit. Let me give you an illustration. I worked with the CEO of an organization that the previous year had lost $156 million. This CEO was brought in from the outside to turn the company around. He had been on the job 3 days, and he went out into the employee parking lot behind the big headquarters building. That side of the building was all glass. He was hoping that people had their noses pressed against the glass watching him. Went out into the employee parking lot. In the front, they had 17 reserved spaces, privileged parking for executives. In front of each spot was somebody's name. He had a can of spray paint. He walked up to the first sign, shook up the can, sprayed over the name. Walked over to the second sign, shook up the can, sprayed over the name. Walked over to the third sign, shook up the can of paint, and sprayed over the name, hoping that people were watching. Then he went inside, got on the intercom system that he said had never been used except for fire drills. He felt sort of like the junior high school principal on Monday morning making announcements. Said, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." Some of you are looking out the window wondering, what's that guy doing? Is he firing the executives? He said, "No, I'm not firing the executives. We need them. We need everybody. We're all in this boat together, and we're going to have to row together. Last year, this company lost $156 million. We can do better. We must do better. So beginning today, we're going to break down all these artificial barriers about title and where you park. The only thing that matters is what will each of us do to add value, to build a great company, to make customers happy. Thanks so much. By the way, if it's raining tomorrow and you get here late, you'll get wet. If you get here early, you can park anywhere you want to." What this CEO was doing was demonstrating what it means to be a gardener and not a mechanic. And he did dozens and dozens of things like that. And the cumulative effect was that he created an environment where people felt involved and obligated regarding the needs of each other and the needs of the organization. He helped his people see themselves in a fresh light. He helped them see each other in a fresh light. He helped them see their marketplace potential in a fresh light. Rather than smothering his people with constraining rules and policies, he gave them sufficient elbow room to try new things and to experiment in new directions. Rather than cut his people down for past poor performance, this great leader chose to lift them up toward great future performance. He created an atmosphere that had absolutely no tolerance for blaming or any kind of victim talk. He created an environment full of encouragement, full of hope, full of collaboration, and personal accountability. So what was the result? In only 12 months, that organization harvested a $207 million improvement in profits. Today it's a case study at the Harvard Business School. Now you might ask, was this guy some kind of flower child? Did he sing Kumbaya and other camp songs in the employee cafeteria? Not at all. In fact, he's one of the toughest-minded business people I've ever known. He's also one of the most effective, most empathic leaders I've ever had the privilege of working with. Great leaders understand that you can rent a person's back and hands, but you must earn a person's head and heart. Great leaders know that organizations are living organisms with many interrelated elements capable of extinction or growth. Great leaders invest their energy in growing rather than fixing. They are gardeners. They create a nurturing environment or a culture, and then they cultivate with great care. Great leadership is based on many principles, and two of the most important are these. First, see it their way. You may not always agree with the people you lead, and that's perfectly okay, but you can never lead them with greatest effectiveness unless and until you genuinely understand their view of the world. Secondly, be a gardener, not a mechanic. Don't try to fix people. Create an environment that affirms and encourages people, an environment that places a premium on solving problems and getting results, an environment where blame is weeded out and where people feel free to stretch and grow and produce. Now, is all of this just touchy-feely, warm and fuzzy stuff for soft people? Not at all. In fact, it's the key to the hard realities of top performance in a tough and fast-moving business world. Believe it. Practice it. It makes all the difference.
If you're looking for a high-content speaker or trainer, Rodger Dean Duncan is your man. No pop psychology or bland platitudes here. His business and leadership savvy are the real deal. His down-to-earth approach helps people feel better, be better, and do better. For keynotes, breakouts, and any training venue, Dr. Rodger Dean Duncan will give your event the long-term impact you want. Don't settle for less.